Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Becomes a Pokemon Trainer. In this story, it is simply what you might expect. The story of My Hero Academia, but in world filled with not only quirks, but also Pokemon. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel, after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The HH was all that Izuku Midoriya could exclaim in his pure shock and confusion. The green-haired successor of All Might stood there, practically frozen, face as red as a Darmanitan, his brain trying to comprehend the words that his classmate before him uttered. Did Asui ask me out on a D-date was the only rational thought playing in his mind, followed by his mind blue screening, rebooting, and the same thought playing again and restarting the cycle. Pikachu was not much better off, himself shocked by the boldness and request of the frog girl, despite only knowing his trainer for over 5 days. Then again Pikachu thought back to the other girls that he and the others realized had grown romantically attached to their trainer. Still, surprised that she asked him so quickly. While Combuskin, inside her Pokeball, was confused on how to interpret this series of events, EV grew tense in his bowl. The brown-furred Pokemon could recall only one instance when his partner was asked to do anything with a girl, before Serena came into their lives. The results included his trainer mocked and beaten by Ash blonde-haired bully, the girl spitting her gum at Izuku's face, and taking at least a week before Eevee and Pikachu could shake the teen out of the funk he fell into. Immediately after realizing that this wasn't Aldera and that Asui was nice and heroic, the evolution Pokemon felt guilty and urged his trainer, psychically, to respond to the surprisingly patient frog girl. Upon Eevee's insistence, Izuku asked Asui. I told you to call me, Tsu. Tsu reminded him. Sorry, Tsu, Izuku corrected himself. Could you repeat what you said? I think I may have misheard something. I asked if you wanted to go on a date. Asui responded. The words still caused for the emerald-eyed teen to freeze and blush bright red. No, this isn't actually happening. Izuku thought in a panic. There's no way a cute girl like Asui would want to ask me out. Wait, where did that cute girl thing come from? I mean, she's cute and attractive, and she's definitely way out of my league. Yeah, I must be suffering from some kind of exhaustion after talking to that crowd that's making me hear things. You aren't hearing things, Midoriya. Asui suddenly said. Izuku immediately clasped his mouth, realizing with horror that he spoke his thoughts out in his infamous mumblings. Pikachu face-palmed and was really tempted to electrocute his dumbest partner. Although, it's actually my fault that sprung this up on you so suddenly. Asui admitted. And that it was a joke. Huh? Izuku questioned, now utterly confused. I was joking. Asui said, still looking completely serious and blunt. Oh? Izuku said, not sure why he suddenly felt somewhat disappointed. But I did wanted to ask you something that many would think is a date. Asui continued. Midoriya, do you want to go on a Pokemon capturing trip with me? Pokemon capturing trip? Izuku repeated confused. It's a tradition that my family has done for generations. Asui revealed. The Asui family would come together during Golden Week, and for a few days, we would go on a trip to a marsh where we would capture wild Pokemon, before we release them into the wild again. Oh, I see. Izuku nodded, finally understanding the concept. That sounds like something that would be a great bonding experience. My dad would agree. Asui nodded. For first-timers, it's actually where we get our first Pokemon. It's where I got my Polidid, and where I met Krogink and Palpatid. Normally, after capturing them I would release them back into the wild. But since you were preparing for UA, you were allowed to keep them. Izuku finished her sentence. Yep, and with the sports festival coming up, I thought the yearly trip would be a great way to get another Pokemon to prepare. Tsu said. It makes sense. Izuku thought, nodding meanwhile. It's different in some years, but most of the second round of trials of the sports festival involve Pokemon, with the first event an Enigma, and the final event always the 1-1-1 brawls. Getting another Pokemon to add to more versatility to whatever challenge it may be is smart. And there is another tradition that our family does. Asui revealed further. A member of the family can invite someone to join us for the trip. And for this year, I want to ask you to join us. Izuku blinked his eyes in surprise. Really? Izuku asked. But, why me? I mean, we're friends. I mean if you think so too. I do. Asui replied, honestly. But surely you have closer friends that you would want to invite. Midoriya said. I do. Asui said again, her eyes looking out the window, glazed as she was lost in thought. Then why choose me? Izuku asked. 2 reasons. Asui said. The first is because of the USJ. The USJ? Izuku repeated, confused. When you let us out of the shipwreck zone. Asui said, the two thinking back to their battle against the watery villains and their Pokemon in the shipwreck zone. And when you saved me from Shigaraki. The memory of Izuku jumping into to save Asui from the decaying villain also popped up, along with Asui, remembering how he continued to fight the Nomu, and how she saw him more differently afterwards. You saved my life, twice really, and I never got the chance to thank you. Hey. Izuku said quickly, placing a hand on Asui's shoulder that had similarly green-haired teen look up at him. It's okay, Eitsu. You don't to thank me or feel like you owe me anything. I was just doing what anybody would do. Also, I don't want to be an inconvenience for your family. If only. Pikachu dryly thought, thinking back to Bakugo. Maybe, but you still saved my life, and I don't want for a good deed to be left unpaid. Asui replied. I asked my mother and father and they said that they would be more than happy for you to come along. Alright. Izuku said, still unsure. And what was the second reason? Asui was silent for a moment, almost pondering her choice of words, which Izuku found odd towards the blunt always speaking what is on her classmate. Finally, she gave her response with the other reason is because I want to get to know my classmate and friend better. Despite the simple answer, Izuku was still left surprised by Asui's sincerity. After pondering his response, all the cons and pros, after looking at Asui's expectant face, the normally dense teen seeing the anxiousness deep in her normally stoic eyes, Izuku looked at Pikachu and the two nodded. Well, if you and your folks are okay with it, then we'd be happy to come with you. Izuku said. Right, Pikachu. Pick up high. Was the response Asui heard from the smiling electric Pokemon. And I can probably speak for Eevee and Combuskin too, that they would love to come. Izuku continued. Sure thing. Eevee replied, excited for the trip. Well, going to a marsh doesn't sound like the greatest idea for me, I'd be happy to go too. Combuskin gave her answer. Asui closed her eyes and smiled. Thank you, Ribbit. She replied. Izuku's cheeks flared red again. Cute. He subconsciously thought. Later. After Izuku agreed to the trip, the two would continue talking for some time about more of the finer details. Asui further elaborated that the 3-day trip would begin on the next Saturday, after the first week of school and during the second week, which was a break week for Golden Week and its national holidays. The two finished their conversation with Izuku, promising to ask for his mother's permission, his mother still being rather protective and doting of him, especially since the sludge villain incident a year ago. Izuku and Asui would tell the news to the rest of their friends. Izuku felt the only truly supportive and happy one among them was Iida, although he did express some concerns over perhaps missing some of the festivities of the important holidays. As for the girls, their faces and smiles said that they understood and were happy, yet something in him felt that they were secretly mad, and expressed that by being strangely silent and cold for the rest of the day. For what reason, Izuku had no idea. The rest of the week and the following one, Izuku spent at UA normally, going to classes, train with his classmates in their hero and Pokemon classes, and training hard to work on his use of One for All. By the end of the week before his trip, Izuku felt that he raised his limit up to 7% normally to 8% for a short while. Thankfully, as Izuku and Asui explained more about the trip, whatever coldness the girls had seemed to lessen if not outright vanish, things going relatively normal between Izuku and the girls, although he noticed that the girls would likewise be more forward with hugs and, during training sessions or projects, asking for them to partner with them. But during the week, all of them were training and practicing hard, training themselves and their Pokemon, for every kind of possibility for the unknown trials that awaited them. Iida would be seen practicing after school with his Lucario, Skarmory, and his final Pokemon, Adagio, training their speed by running as fast as possible. Asui, herself, was training in UA's pool on her swimming and tongue-catching skills, her Polidid and Palpidid training on their swimming speed too, while alternating to helping with Krogink's more fighting training, and, with the others' help, evading and blocking attacks to better its defense and special defense. Serena would likewise spend most of her training at the pool, training to manipulate better amounts of water, and ways to use her water in a Deku-issued notebook of tips, while her Malot, a strawberry blonde teen, would at times find herself training at the same time as Asui, with the two ultimately training together, with Serena at times staring suspiciously at Asui, pondering if there is some unknown reason why Asui chose to invite Midoriya. The students would also train through regular cardio and weightlifting, like Shoji mostly trained by lifting up weights, with his Pokemon mimicking their trainer, or boosting their defense and attack through spars against each other, and even Hagakure, who was struggling in comparison. Ojiro and Sero mostly focused on their mobility, with Ojiro hopping and jumping around one of the battle zones with his Ambipom following behind him, while Sero swung around via his tapes and his Ariados following suit. Some students decided to train together, like Asui and Serena. Uraraka, Mina, and, surprisingly, Aoyama trained in the USJ, now repaired and villain-free. Uraraka would float many objects, from small to medium size, with her zero gravity, to train her endurance and help ease her nausea, and had Minior psychically move the floating objects for Mina, Aoyama, and their Pokemon, who would use them for target practice. Mina would destroy them with her acid and Aoyama with his naval laser, though the latter would sometimes flaunt and show off, only to be later hit in the head with a falling piece of debris. Some training sessions were interrupted by each other. Koda would train to use his Anivis on surrounding Pokemon to boost his level of control, only to be interrupted by Sato and his Pokemon training, the former of whom made a lot of noise that messed with Koda's concentration and control. The rest decided to work more individually. Kirishima was mostly seen training his hardening by either jumping off the buildings in the USJ's landslide zone, or had his Pokemon attack him. Kaminari and his Pokemon would work on their electrical output and stamina, Jiro trained by her honing her listening skills and throwing accuracy with her jacks, and Momo would be simultaneously reading from her encyclopedias for more information, and ordering her Pokemon to do several different training regimens. Bakugo would be yelling and shouting as he trained his explosion quirk and bossing his Pokemon, all the while unaware of Principal Nezu keeping an eye on him while he researched and investigated out there. Todoroki was rarely seen training at UA, and mostly kept to himself at his home, training in his Pokemons as well, though his attention was spent the least on Vulpix, who was visibly saddened. And finally, Izuku trained by running around and lifting weights at Agaba Beach, while Pikachu improved on his speed, Eevee on his heal pulse and attack, and Combusken on speed and attack. The training would make the days pass by quickly for the UA students, and before Izuku knew it, the day came for his trip with Asui and her family. Saturday noon. Are you sure you got everything you need, Izuku? Inko asked her son. Yes, Mom. Izuku said, his voice slightly strained in tired impatience after the 10th time his mother asked the same question. Did you put a waterproof suitcase for your phone? Inko asked further. If you are going to the marsh, then you need to keep it safe in case you need to call for help. Yes, Mom, I told you 10 times already. Izuku stressed out. I got enough clothes, poke food for Eevee, Pikachu, and Combusken, emergency supplies, and Asui said her dad's got a spare fishing rod for me to use. Oh, I know. Inko said. It's just, this will be the furthest time we will stay from each other, and I can't help but worry. Izuku's annoyance quickly faded away as he hugged his worried mother. She's right, Izuku said. Other than a one-night sleepover at Kabakugo's house when we were younger, me and Mom have spent a whole day apart from one another. Ever since she and my father split, and when I found out I was quirkless, Mom was extra protective of me. This trip, it might as well be a sign to her that I'm truly growing up and will have to leave out on my own, one day. It's okay, Mom. I'll be fine. Izuku pacified his mother with some back rubs. I can take care of myself, and I got Eevee and the others to watch my back. As always, Eevee called out, smiling. Sergeant Pikachu, reporting for duty. Pikachu strolled up beside Eevee, wearing an army camo cap and saluting dramatically. I still can't believe that you got Midoriya to buy that for you. Combusken shook her in disbelief. But you can count on us, Miss Midoriya. Besides, Asui's dad said that they wouldn't be going too deep into the marsh. Izuku said as the son and mother broke the hug. It will be Asui's sister's first time going, so we will stay by the safer side of the marsh. I know. Inko nodded, still worried. It's also the last time that you were there, you and Eevee nearly died and I just don't want. Izuku frowned, his mind flashing back to that day. Bakugo blasting the fence open, marching through the forest on the edge of the marsh, that weird pink Pokemon, Bakugo's full, and... Izuku shook his head to shake off the bad memories. Don't worry, Mom. Izuku said again. Nothing like that will happen again. I promise. I will never be the same defenseless kid again. I swear. Inko finally smiled and nodded. Okay. Inko said. After the two finished their heart-to-heart, Izuku could finally realize his mother's continuing greater health. After months and months of her exercising and eating healthier since his own training with All Might began, Midoriya's mother was slowly shaping up to her more slimmer body when he was 4. She even looked taller and younger, almost like she could have been Izuku's sister, instead. Of course, she still had some body fat still around her waist, but progress was progress, and, though she still worried sometimes, she was becoming more light-hearted and less worrying too. Soon the doorbell rang, drawing the two's attention. Hey Midoriya. Asui's voice called out from the other side. It's Sue. Oh, I'll be right there, Sue. Izuku called out, correcting himself again. Better. Asui croaked out. Izuku gathered his stuff and called Eevee and Combusken into their Pokeballs, Pikachu climbing up to his shoulder. As he turned to his mom to say his goodbyes, he blinked in surprise at the teasing smile and eyes of his mother. Mom? Izuku asked. So, it's Sue, huh? Inko questioned teasingly. I didn't know you two were that close. Mom? Izuku exclaimed, blushing up a storm at his mother's meaning. It's not like that. We're just friends. Oh, I know, I'm just teasing you. Inko waved off her son's blushing and stuttering, and brought him into a hug. Be safe, you hear me? I will. Izuku smiled and hugged back. They broke apart and Izuku went to the door with Pikachu and his stuff. Bye Mom. See you in 3 days. Bye Izuku. Oh, and charm the socks of her and her family. Inko suggested, her teasing voice back. I'm sure both me and Mrs. Asui would like some grandbabies in the future. Mom. Izuku yelled, his face as hot as a nuclear reactor. Ignoring his mother's laughing, Izuku opened the door to greet Asui, only to freeze at what he saw. Asui wore a bright green shirt over a moss green rain jacket over a light green sweatshirt that almost hugged her chest and modest breasts, her bimini green shorts ending halfway down her thighs and showing off her amazing legs. "Hello Midoriya," she greeted, light blush on her cheeks. Izuku gazed in awe of Asui's beauty. In his short time getting to know his classmate for over a week, Izuku admitted that Asui was a very beautiful girl, much like the rest of the girls in his class, finding even her features that would seem off-putting to most men, like her white eyes, large hands, and mostly hunched posture rather cute. With even sending Asui in a mad blush for complimenting her large hands as a factor of her quirk. But now seeing Asui as such an outfit outside her normal school clothes, gym uniform, and hero suit, left the fellow green-haired teen stunned, his cheeks flaring. Noticing that his trainer was too busy gaping like a Magikarp, Pikachu snapped the teen out of his silence with a subtle whip of his tail to back of Izuku's skull. Effectively knocked out of his trance, Izuku blushed redder before finally replying, "Hi, Asu." Izuku greeted back. "Strange to see me out of school clothes and hero suit, huh?" Asui asked. "Yeah." Izuku rubbed his neck embarrassed, as she hit the nail on the head. "Makes sense, Ribbit." Tsuyu croaked as she stared at what Izuku was wearing. The ninth successor of One for All wore a plain white t-shirt that just had the word t-shirt in kanji plastered in white letters over a green square. He finished the outfit with moss green shorts and a green camo parka. While Asui found the t-shirt uneventful, if only a little adorable on Midoriya, the fact it hugged his chiseled body so well, made the normally emotionless girl flare red. "So are we ready to go?" Asui asked, shaking herself off her daydreams. "Oh yeah, got all the stuff I need," Izuku said, gesturing to his backpack and bags. "And you folks?" Asui gestured behind her for Izuku to see a car with a woman waving from the driver's seat. "My mother," Asui answered, while Izuku waved. "Me and her came to get you while Dad and my siblings set up camp at the marsh." "Cool." Izuku nodded. "I look forward to finally meeting them. Let's go." Waving one last goodbye at his mother by the door, her teasing smile which Izuku tried to ignore, he noticed Asui still had her light pink blush on her cheeks. Clueless, Izuku brushed this off, while Asui tried to ignore the words that Mrs. Midoriya said, that she overheard. Getting his stuff ready in the trunk, Izuku hopped into the back seat to meet the matriarch of the Asui family. It was clear that Bear Asui was whom Tsuyu took after by how similar to the two were. Her long, dark green hair was similar to Asui's, along with her eyes being similarly wide, though smaller compared to her daughter's eyes. Her face grew whiter around her long mouth, had light pink marks on her cheeks, and had a small nose high up too almost between her eyes. "You must be Mrs. Asui," Izuku said, holding out his hand to shake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you as well, Midoriya." Beru smiled and shook his hand. "Why, I was very interested in finally meeting the boy who saved my little girl. On behalf of my family, we are truly grateful." "There's no need, Mrs. Asui." Izuku rubbed his neck, still smiling. "I was just doing what a hero should do." "Oh please, Mrs. Asui makes me sound old." Beru shook her head. "Just call me Beru from now on. Like mother like daughter." Izuku thought amusingly. "Of course, Mrs. A, I mean Bear." With an amused chuckle from Bear and Tsuyu, Bear started the car and drove off, Izuku and Pikachu waving a last goodbye to Inko. But as they drove off, Izuku noticed as they drove a white pickup and, would he swear he saw, wild blonde hair. Was that all me, Izuku thought before he was shaken out of his thoughts by Bear. "So, Midoriya, are you excited for our trip?" Bear asked. "Oh yeah, I am," Izuku quickly answered. "I'm honored that you all would allow me to come on your family trip. It's a family tradition to invite those closest to us outside the family." Bear responded. "Strangers are just friends you haven't met yet." "That's true." Izuku smiled, reaching out and rubbing Combuskin's, his newest Pokemon, Pokeball. Izuku then remembered what he wanted to say earlier and said, "Oh, and I'm sorry that I couldn't have helped out with packing and setting up the camp." "Oh, don't feel sorry at all." Bear waved off his apology. "You live closer to the marshland than us, so it would be unpractical for you to drive all the way to Aichi Prefecture, only to drive back here. I guess." Izuku relented, still feeling guilty for the imagined inconvenience. "If it makes you feel better, Midoriya, Dad will probably not finish the camp by himself when we get there." Asui jumped in. "Samador can be a bit lazy, and Sasuke is too young and small for the heavy stuff, so you can help when we get there." "Sure thing," Izuku replied, smiling at being able to help. Bear chuckled amused as she spied Izuku's smile from the back view mirror. Tsuyu was right, she thought. Midoriya is rather selfless and kind. I can see why my daughter has fallen for the boy. I like him already. It took only an hour to reach their destination, the outskirts of the forest path that leads to the marshlands that would be their camp. Izuku looked out to see the forest area, looking to his far left to where would be the place where Bakugo would blast open the fence, and he, Bakugo, and his lackeys would enter the forest. The memory brought a frown to Izuku's face before shrugging it off and bringing out his Pokeballs. Vivi, Kambaskin, come on out. Izuku called out as he tossed his Pokeballs up. They opened up and out popped Eevee and Kambaskin. Kambaskin looked around at the new environment while Eevee looked the same direction as Izuku did, a frown likewise appearing on his face. Kambaskin, mind helping me out carry some of this stuff? Izuku asked. Sure thing. Kambaskin nodded and went to grab some of the stuff from the open trunk. Izuku went to grab the rest, lifting his bags and Suyus and bears easily. The two Asuis looked at Izuku happily, and without asking, carrying their stuff. My, quite the gentleman. Beru chuckled. That's Midoriya for you. Sue smiled, as she brought out her own Pokemon out. The small group would walk down a marked path, which Izuku figured must have been done by the Asuis or those before them to remember where to go. The walk took a good 30 minutes before they reached the incomplete campsite. There they saw 2 tents already set up and a third only half complete, all circled around a makeshift campfire that was yet to be lit. Izuku noticed 2 small children laughing as the older one, the brother, and his Pokemon, a Lomber, playfully chasing after a little girl, Asui's sister, Izuku figured. Izuku could also see the half-obscured figure of a man working on a boat, while a Seismidid and Quagsire helped move it near the water. Honey, we're here. Bear called out. And we brought Midoriya. Asui joined in. The 2 children stopped their playing to finally notice the 3 and smiled. Mama. Big sis. The 2 called out as they rushed towards them for a hug. Izuku smiled, seeing the happy family interact with each other. Suddenly, Izuku felt a chill run down his body, drawing him towards the source. Izuku followed the unknown sensation towards his right where he could make out a small figure hiding in the bushes, large eyes staring at him. Before he could see closer to see what the creature was, Asui, now breaking up her hug from her siblings, directed them to Izuku. Samador, Sasuke, this is my classmate who saved me in the USJ, Izuku Midoriya. Asui greeted him to her siblings. Midoriya, this is my little brother Samador, and my little sister, Sasuke. Samador was a head smaller than Asui, though his posture was slightly hunched like Asui, perhaps around 10 years old. He had the same dark green hair of his mother and sister though shorter, with half of it covering the right side of his face. His unobscured side showed his long mouth, also like his sister and mother, his half-closed dark green eyes, and light pink cheek marks like his mother. He was wearing a khaki shorts and a blue t-shirt under a small green parka. Sasuke Asui looked like a younger version of her big sister, around 6 years old, and half the size of her brother. Her eyes were large with 3 upper eyelashes, much like her sister, light tan skin, her dark green hair styled in twin low pigtails, and her mouth in a curious pout as she looked at him. She was currently wearing pink shirt and blue overalls. It's really nice to meet you. Izuku greeted with a smile and nod, waving off his stalker for the time. Yo. Samador greeted back with a nod and a 2-finger peace sign. And this is Lomber. The Lomber waved at him. Sasuke walked up silently to Izuku before surprisingly grabbing and hugging his leg. I'm Sasuke. She exclaimed happily. Thank you for saving, big sis. Izuku's surprise quickly morphed to a kind smile, and awkwardly patted the little girl's head. Nice to meet you Sasuke. Izuku replied. It was my pleasure to help save your sister, though she also saved my life too. Asui croaked happily, a light blush on her cheeks. Oh, and these are my Pokemon, Eevee, Pikachu, and Kambaskin. Izuku introduced the 2 to his Pokemon, who called out their names in greeting. Cool. Samador exclaimed as he ran up to and patting Pikachu's head, to his enjoyment, though inched away when he tried poking at his red electric sacs, not wanting to accidentally shock electrocute the 10-year-old. Yay. New Pokemon. Sasuke childishly exclaimed as she went to hug Eevee. Kambaskin was met by Lomber who nodded in greeting and pulled out his green hand to shake. Kambaskin nodded back and went to grab the hand to shake, only when she made contact, Kambaskin cried out in and shook her hand, an unpleasant feeling shooting down her paw as slippery slime was on it. Lomber laughed mischievously while Kambaskin fumed in anger. Izuku brought out his Pokedex and scanned the Pokemon. Lomber, the jolly Pokemon, and the evolved form of Lotted. The Pokedex revealed. Lomber's entire body is covered by a slippery, slimy film. It feels horribly unpleasant to be touched by this Pokemon's hands. Lomber is often mistaken for a human child. Ha, so that's what happened. Izuku hummed out loud, as Kambaskin still growled angrily as Lomber laughed. See you. Another voice spoke up, drawing their attention. The man was larger and taller than the rest of them, around Izuku's height. Out of all of the Asui family, he was the one with the most amphibian-like appearance. His head appeared like a more squared, rigid pollided, short-cropped black hair atop his head, his black eyes far apart, bumps around the sides of his face, and his mouth as long as the rest of his family. He wore a fisherman getup with a red safety vest jacket, green pants, and black boots. Honey. Bear replied by hugging the new arrival, which Izuku could fully tell it was Asui's father. Midoriya, this is my father, Ganma Asui. Asui greeted Izuku to her father. Dad, this is Izuku Midoriya, the one I told you about. Ah, nice to finally meet you, young man. Gamma Asui nodded and extended his hand to shake. It's great to meet you too, sir. Izuku shook the man's hand. Thanks for letting me come out with you and your family. Please, if it's anybody here that should be thanking someone, it ought to be me to you. Gamma replied, bowing in respect. I, along with our family, formally thank you, Izuku Midoriya, for saving my daughter. We are in your debt. The rest of the Asui family bowed as well, even Satsuki. Please, this is unnecessary. Izuku said, embarrassed. It was nothing. Your daughter did more to help me than I could have done. Do you ever take a compliment, Midoriya? Asui asked. Once every blue moon. Pikachu replied with snark, though the Asui family couldn't understand him. Or if he's forced to accept the compliments. EV added. Izuku's sweat dropped hot at the two's comments, before looking back to where he saw those eyes staring at him. To his surprise, the eyes in the small figure had disappeared. What are you staring at, Midoriya? Tsuyu asked. Oh, I just thought I saw something staring at me. Izuku replied, looking to Asui. Oh, it could be one of the many Pokemon in this area. Barry jumped into the conversation. This place is teeming with different kinds of Pokemon. It's why our family comes here for our capture and release trips, with the exception of keeping a few as our partners. Sameter. Gamma's loud angry voice drew the three back towards him, yelling at Sameter. You were supposed to set up the tent and light the fire while I worked on the boat. I know. Sameter rubbed his head, ashamed. I just thought a little time to play with Satsuki would be alright. I didn't notice it took so long. Before Gamma could chastise his son more, Bear spoke up. Honey, since the camp is not finished yet, perhaps Midoriya could help you. He feels rather guilty for not helping us pack back at home, and I think this could ease his conscience. That sounds well, honey. Gamma nodded. That is if you do wish to help, Midoriya. Sure thing, sir. Izuku nodded and smiled happily. I'd be happy to help. Hours later. It took till sunset to set up the camp fully. Izuku would help Sameter with his tent before setting up his own, with Kombuskin lending a hand. Afterwards, Izuku helped Gamma with setting up the boat. Gamma handed Izuku a spare fishing rod and helped him adjust it to Izuku's preference. Meanwhile, Eevee and Pikachu played around with Satsuki and Sameter, while Baru and Tsuyu would go out and gather some firewood for the campfire and check on their supplies, such as food and medical supplies. Once the work was done, Gamma and Baru decided that it was too late for any fishing, so they decided to call the night in with a final campfire and s'mores. They gathered around in a circle, with Gamma at the head and Izuku across from him, Baru and Sameter by Izuku's left and Tsuyu and Satsuki by his right. Tsuyu would help show Satsuki how to safely roast the marshmallow and how to set up the s'more. Izuku's and Tsu's Pokemon gathered around them, alongside Sameter's Lotted, and the Seismidid and Quagsire, the former which he found out was Gamma's Pokemon, and Quagsire Bears. Izuku smiled happily at the great time he was having, finding the family experience heartwarming. So, Midoriya. Gamma spoke. You've been to the marsh before, correct? Izuku's smile would falter for a bit. Yes, sir. Izuku replied. Ah, none of this, sir, nonsense, young man. Gamma respectfully waved off. You saved my daughter. That owes you the right to call me by Gamma. Like father, like daughter too. Izuku thought, chuckling. Sure thing, sir, I mean Gamma. You might want to continue reminding him, Dad. Tsu spoke. I keep telling him to call me by Tsu, but he seems to forget constantly. Izuku's sweat dropped, embarrassed. Suddenly, Izuku sneezed. Bless you, Midoriya. Bear said, giving him a napkin. Are you perhaps feverish? No, I'm fine. Izuku said. I just felt like someone was talking about me for a moment. Meanwhile, Inko squealed in absolute delight. I'm going to have so much grandchildren to spoil. Back at the Midoriya residence, Inko, wearing a fancy green dress, was eating with a suit and tux wearing Toshinori, the dinner table fancied up to look like a fancy dinner table from a 5-star restaurant, with Mr. Mime comedically playing their waiter. Now, Toshinori sweat dropped and took a sip of his wine. Yep, I should have kept that fact from Inko. Toshinori thought, regrettably informing Inko about Izuku's luck with his female classmates, which Inko ended up liking a little too much. If he finds out about this, young Midoriya is going to kill me. Back to the marsh. Yeah, it's nothing, I'm fine. Izuku said again. Noted. Gamma nodded. But back to my question, you've been to the marsh before, yes? When? Izuku's smile faltered again, this time Bear noticing. Honey, perhaps we should change topics. Bear suggested. I believe Izuku might not wish to discuss his last time here. No, it's alright, Mrs. Asui mean Bear. Izuku waved off her concerns. Thank you really, but I can talk about it. It's just been a while since I thought about it. The Asui family was silent, patiently waiting for their guests to continue. Izuku looked to Eevee and Pikachu, the two nodding. With a sigh, Izuku spoke, the last time I was here wasn't actually my intention. It was when I was 4. Izuku remembered the events of that day. I was around 4 and I was adventuring with an old friend of mine and his other friends by the forest nearby. We weren't allowed to go there, but my old friend was stubborn and didn't like to be told what to do, so he broke through the fence with his quirk and went in, with me, Evie, and the others following him. I didn't really want to go breaking the rules, but I respected him and followed him. When we were walking through the forest, searching for Pokemon, Izuku continued. He had a bag full of Pokeballs that I didn't know where he got, maybe from his parents. Gamma and Bear frowned and looked to each other at that info. During our walk, I found a hidden path through some bushes. Izuku continued, opting to ignore the mention of the weird pink Pokemon from the past. After showing it to my friend, he went on ahead, and before we knew it, we were next to the marsh. It sounds like your friend was bad influence on you and your friends, Guru said, motherly. They weren't my friends, Izuku said, a sad frown at their mention. They were more calm my friend's friends, or rather you could say they were his lackeys really. But back then, I didn't know any better. Izuku rubbed the side of his stomach subconsciously. So you noticed, as well as the sad frown on Eevee, and the rather angry one from Pikachu. We then started walking over a log bridge to get to the other side, and then my friend ended up tripping and falling to the river. He was alright, but I was worried, so I went down and lent out a hand to help. He didn't like that. Gamma frowned in concern. Did he lash out at you, perhaps? Gamma got the answer to his question by the flinch in Izuku's eyes. He was always prideful, Izuku answered. He never liked getting help from anyone. He always thought that he was the best, and I think he thought I was looking down on him. Idiot. Izuku's hands clenched tightly. After that, he and the others ran and left me behind. I got lost trying to find them and I ended up in the marsh. How horrible. Bear gasped horrified. Tsuyu croaked angrily, her own hands clenching hard that they could almost hear the crack of her knuckles. What happened? Samador asked, interested. Me and Eevee wandered through the marsh till it got dark. We couldn't even tell where we were going through how hard it was to see. Izuku responded. It then started to rain, and so me and Eevee went to find shelter in a cave. A horde of Zubits didn't like that and chased us out. So we tried hiding under a tree, but we angered another horde of Pokemon, a horde of Spearows and Fearows. Oh no. Satsuki gasped out. Yeah, oh no. Izuku chuckled bitterly. Me and Eevee ran as fast as we could, but I ended up slipping from the mud, and it looked like we were about to get overtaken, and Izuku shook his head, before looking to his second partner. But then, out of nowhere, Pikachu jumped out and saved me and Eevee with the largest thunderbolt you would ever see. He saved me and Eevee that day. After that, my mother arrived with my friend's mother who were searching for me and found me and Eevee, but Pikachu decided to come with us. From then on, we were friends forever. You damn right, boss. Pikachu said, fondly. You're damn right. The Assis were stunned by the heroic act of the Pikachu, smiling happily at Izuku's rescue by the Pokemon. Tsuyu and Krogan croaked in surprise, that the two's story of meeting each other and becoming friends in the marsh was similar to them. That's wonderful to hear, Guru said, happily. So cool. Samador gasped in awe, looking at Pikachu with a sort of reverence that Pikachu took pride in. The friendship meant to be, Gamma said. This marsh. It might look like a regular marsh, but it is a mystical place. Here, many of our family, as well as many others, form strong bonds with Pokemon we meet here. It was here that me and Seismidit met and became lifelong partners. Gamma patted a large blue Pokemon head. Me and Quagsire met here when he was just a whooper, Bear said, patting her Quagsire. This was also the place where I met Gamma for the first time. Bear held out her hand, and Gamma held it in his own with loving care. It was here where I met my Pokemon too. Tsuyu jumped in. Polidid was my first Pokemon, Krogunk, and I met when I was still little, and Palpidid I met the last time I came here for UA. Lomber and I became friends here too. Samador joined in, hugging Lomber. Sasuke whimpered sadly. I want a Pokemon friend too, she said sadly. Gamma placed a hand on his baby girl's shoulder. And you will, Sasuke, Gamma said assuredly. This trip is where you will find a companion Pokemon of your own. That I promise you. In our family, we have our first trip to the marsh when we are 6. Tsuyu told Midoriya. Now that Satsuki's of that age, this is also her first time and where she will catch her own Pokemon. Izuku smiled, and stared up the night sky to see the stars shine and twinkle visibly. Mr. Gamma is right, Izuku thought. I don't know how, but I can feel something magical about this place. Something. Midoriya, your marshmallow is on fire, Tsuyu bluntly stated. It was a rather humorous sight for the Asui family to see their guest panicking and waving around a fiery marshmallow on his stick, before Lomber took pity and put it out with a water gun attack, and soaking Izuku in the process. The next day, Izuku was fortunate to have accustomed himself to waking up early. After what Samador jokingly called Izuku's interpretation of an owl in Marowak, they decided to call it quits for today and to sleep. Gamma and Bear would sleep in their own tent, Tsuyu and Satsuki in another, Samador in his own, and Izuku in the tent he brought, their respective Pokemon either sleeping inside with their trainers, or sleeping right outside. After a peaceful night of sleep, Izuku and the rest would be awakened by Gamma and Bear at early sunrise. Samador and Sasuke whined the early Wakyup call, yet Izuku and Tsu woke up to little to no complaints. Izuku has spent the past year waking up early to train with All Might at Dagaba Beach or training himself, so the early Wakyup was of little inconvenience. They quickly woke themselves up and got ready for the long day ahead of them. According to Ganma's and Bear's plans, Izuku, Tsuyu, and Sasuke would travel along the river, while Ganma, Bear, and Samador would take their boat through the river of the marsh, and they will all circle around Shinju Lake, or as it's referred to otherwise as Lake Verity. Izuku asks why they don't go deeper into the lake. Ganma answered by saying that it was impossible to reach the center of the lake. When Izuku pressured his question, Ganma would sigh. I wasn't lying when I said this place is a magical place. Ganma replied. The lake is a mysterious thing. If you look at it from afar, there exists a small island with a cave entrance, but when you get closer towards it, it disappears like a mirage. Many have tried reaching the center, but as soon as they near it, a strange fog appears and blinds them. When it clears, they either find themselves back where they started or at the other side of the lake. I've tried many times in my years, but every attempt leads the same way. No one has ever reached the center or reached the island mirage, and it's almost like that's the wish of the lake. A strong surge of curiosity welled in Izuku to try, but then he looked at Sasuke and Samador, and immediately thought otherwise. Who knows what will happen if we try to go near the center? Izuku thought. Sasuke and Samador could fall off the boat, and we would never be able to find them if we tried to go back in. And who knows what kinds of Pokemon live in the center? He then thought back to Bakugo and how he arrogantly walked into the forest and the edge of the marsh, without a single care to leaving him behind, like he did. As much as I want to go, I won't ditch or lose anyone. Izuku thought, determined. I won't act like him. With their plans settled, the group set off on their little adventure. Ganma would leave Izuku with the spare fishing rod, in case he wanted to fish by the surface. They walked down the river, Sasuke happily skipping over the tree roots and rocks, only complying with Tsuyu's concerns for a few seconds before doing what she was doing before. Pikachu stayed on Izuku's shoulders, not wanting to get his paws dirty from the mud, while Eevee had no problem wailing beside them. Kamaskin decided to stay in her Pokeball, water and mud, not really agreeing with the fire type. As they walked, Izuku couldn't help but feel like the creature from before was following them. He would stop and turn back to the woods, deeper to the right of him, and swear that he could see those same large eyes for a second before they hid or fled. Ultimately, they reached closer to the end of the river, the bright sunlight shining through the exit between two large trees. As they passed the exit, Izuku gasped. In front of him was the lake, the water is sparkling blue, so clear that sky reflected off of it could be mistaken for it. The marsh and forest circled around the lake, giving the lake a circular shape. Amazing. Eevee gasped out. You said it. Pikachu replied. True to Ganma's word, what appears like a misty fog seemed to linger around the center of the lake. Wait, Izuku blinked before squinting, narrowing his eyes as he leaned forward, spotting something. A small island and a cave. Is it the Midoriya? Izuku jumped in surprise, turning quickly to see Tsu. You okay? You were staring off for a while. Oh yeah, it's just. Izuku looked back to the lake to see the small island again, only to find it gone, the misty fog returning. Nothing. It's just the lake. Amazing, right? Tsu guessed. Izuku nodded, dumbly. It's alright. I was just as speechless the first time I saw it. You've never seen the lake the last time you were here. Me and Eevee were mostly lost in the marsh and woods. Izuku answered, looking out in awe. I don't remember coming across the lake. Herbert. Tsu croaked in acknowledgement. Well, let's get going, before Sasuke wanders off. She's really curious. Izuku and Asui started walking again along the side of the lake, Sasuke ahead of them by a bit, looking around with a curious smile. After a while of walking, Asui stopped and looked at the lake. This looks like a great place to start fishing, Asui said. Sasuke, make sure not to wander too far away from us. Sasuke nodded, obediently. Yes, big sis, she said. As she walked round towards the tree nearby them, Izuku smiled and looked at his classmate. She listens to you well. Samador too, Izuku mentioned. You must be a great big sister. Tsu blushed a bit, grabbing and preparing her fishing rod. Usually it's only us three, Asui replied. Mom and Dad are usually not at home. Their job takes them around a lot. Oh, I see. Izuku acknowledged, bringing out his own fishing rod. It must be hard to take care of them on your own. It is, Asui nodded. But it's satisfying. Seeing their smiles, hearing them laugh, tucking Satsuki into bed, it makes it all worth it. Izuku smiled happily at Asui as she cast her line and launched it into the lake. I'm glad to hear that, Izuku replied. What about you, Midoriya? Asui asked. Do you have any siblings? No, it's only been me and my mother for as long as I can remember, Izuku replied, as he prepared his fishing rod. What about your father? Asui asked. Izuku's hands froze mid-preparing the lure. Pikachu and Eevee looked at their trainer, his expression hidden by the shadows of his hair. After a moment, he continued and replied, I don't know. I don't remember much of my father. He left us when we found out when I was quirkless. Asui croaked confused. Quirkless? Shit. Izuku panicked internally. I mean, when we thought I was quirkless. My quirk took a long time to manifest, later than usual. Yeah, I remember. Asui said. I and the rest of the class overheard you say that. Yeah, well, I didn't have the best childhood because of that. Izuku continued, sadly. After hearing that I didn't manifest a quirk, and that I was presumably quirkless, my father left my mother and went to America on a business trip. He still sends us money for child support, but I haven't seen or met the guys since. That must have been hard. Asui said, sympathetically. Yeah. No father, no friends, no quirk, it was hell. Izuku frowned before shaking his head, throwing back the line and casting it out, the lure landing in the water. The two were silent for a brief few seconds before Asui caves and asks, that old friend of yours, the one who left you behind, it was Bakugo wasn't it? Izuku's hands on the pole clenching tighter, and his frown was all the answer Asui needed. Asui croaked angrily at the thought of the arrogant explosive teen, understanding why he seemed so erratically angry and violent towards Midoriya, and why Midoriya always looked downcast when talking about Bakugo and his past. I'm sorry I brought it up. Asui apologized. Izuku was surprised at her apology and shook his head. No, you don't need to apologize. Izuku replied. You didn't know, and whatever feelings I have over it are my problem. A hero is supposed to help with other people's problems. Asui said. Like how you went back to save All Might, and saving me from Shigaraki. Izuku looked down guiltily. Actually, I'm the one who has to apologize for something. Asui croaked, confused. Why? Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.